And obviously today I wanted to just dwell on the impact of COVID-19, largely not on just the carrier itself, but globally. It has impacted every other carrier around the globe, and how this has reflected globally in terms of the airlines, passengers, and the losses that do come with it. For the realization that how this impact, how the global impact, and what it would look like for Samoa, what it does look like for Samoa Airways as well. I'll share with you a couple of slides that I had with that has been shared by ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, the recent as of the end of 2020, in terms of the global report around the COVID-19 situation, its an impact on the industry overall in comparison to 2019 levels. As you can see, there's a lot of red against the blue. And you know, from an airline's perspective, globally, the airlines cut 50% of their seats in 2020 versus 2019. Now, this resulted obviously in 2,699 million passengers lost. And that results in $371 billion in USD lost in passenger revenue. Now, Samoa Airways is only a small blip of that. But as you can see globally, how that impacts travel itself and the airline industry, and how a number of airlines around the world are collapsing one by one as the pandemic continues as well. Some of them cannot sustain themselves. Many of them are privately owned. Most of the survivors are either national carriers who are government supported or government owned. Obviously, the two at the bottom is to identify international traffic and domestic traffic within the industry itself, and both have lost a number of dollars and passengers as well. I will share this slide, of course, with the faculty later on for you guys' information if you would like to see more of it. This is just to indicate to you versus other crises that we had during the couple of decades that we've been through so far. You know, the oil crisis, you had the Iraq War, the Iraq-Iran War, the Gulf crisis, you had the financial crisis, you had 9/11. Now, those impacts on the global traffic itself, they were substantial in terms of the drop. But look at COVID-19. That's what it did. It just, it dropped drastically. It fell right down. And that hit everybody. And the fact that the COVID-19 not only impacted airlines, it impacted a whole industry, a number of industries across the board. That included not only airline, airports, tourism, hotels, suppliers to the industry itself. All those were impacted automatically when things fell apart. So you can imagine how much the airline industry would like to see itself back in the air. But again, it's always working with our government in terms of the safety of it to go back into play again. This is to show on a monthly basis versus 2019 the differences in terms of the traffic that we've had, domestic and international, of course. And that is 2019 on the top, just to break it down on a monthly basis. Yeah, it doesn't look good at all. Sorry, it's not all good news, but it's just to show you the impact that it has had so far globally. This is to show you just the region itself. As you see, Asia Pacific, which is where we fall under, in terms of the impact itself, it's the largest impact region for COVID-19. Passenger loss 921 million, revenue was minus 120 billion lost versus 2019. And we fall under the Asia Pacific. And lastly, why the Asia Pacific is one of the largest that's impacted is because, of course, Asia. If you're familiar with the Asian market, you would notice this year, this month alone, is the Chinese New Year. Feb, March is when Chinese New Year comes into play. And you got millions of Chinese that need to travel. You know, many go home after working a year in the city or go and have holidays with their family. And that has been halted. And that alone impacts a good amount of travel for us as well. And a lot of those Chinese do travel down to the Pacific as well for holidays. So, as you notice, the whole world is actually affected in terms of losses, in terms of passengers, and of course revenue itself. This is just a quick overview in terms of various industries that also impacted from COVID-19, not just the airline, apart from air passenger traffic, which is a decline of 60%, as mentioned earlier. Airports lose money, lots and lots of money. When airports don't have aircrafts, airports are built for aircrafts. Airports are built for passengers. And everything that goes through an airport is charged. As soon as the wheels of an aircraft touch down, they'll charge you by the weight. The heavier the aircraft, the more you pay. And the number of passengers you bring in, the more they charge. And then there's departure taxes, all that come into play. And that's 111.8 billion in revenue. So yes, our airports here also loses money. From the airline's perspective, of course, as mentioned, yes, there is a decline in revenue, and that's what has been lost, 65.9% decline in revenue from passenger kilometers, which is RPKs, where airlines measure the revenue passenger kilometers in terms of how measure its revenue versus its costs, etc. Bit of a complex sort of formula, but I can divulge more of that later on in terms of people have some time later on. Tourism, a decline in international tourism receipts. That's a lot of money in terms of 910 to 1,170 billion in 2020, compared to 1.5 trillion it made in 2019. That's a substantial amount of money lost on tourism alone. And that also affects us here on the ground in Samoa, with all our hoteliers, our ground operators, transport folks, restaurants, etc. Trade, as I mentioned, suppliers, etc., merchandise has dropped by 9.2%, and of course the global economy as well gets affected. This is on the, excuse me, on the seats per airline and the overall reduction, except the passengers as well. As you can see, the seat capacity, overall reduction ranging from 46 to 51%. This is what's been projected between January and June this year. So it's still going to be a bad first half of this year. And that's what is expected by most airlines itself, including Samoa Airways. And there's expected to be not as big as what 2020 projected for in terms of the results, but again, 166 to 190 billion is still a significant amount of money that's been lost by the airlines. This is to show how some of the travel has changed between 2019 and 2020 in terms of domestic and international, where you see a reduction in the blue between 2019 and 2020, where the international has dropped quite a bit. Airlines have taken to the skies of trying to increase their domestic travel to sustain themselves. So most of the airlines started to ramp up their domestic services, as hoteliers also decided to ramp up sales within the country in terms of holidays, etc. So, for example, Australia, New Zealand, they started to sell their own within the country itself, and the airlines sold more domestic tickets. I mean, Australia alone, Qantas was selling tickets as cheap as $4 to get people flying domestically. You know, $15 sometimes. So you know that's how bad it got, because they needed people on the seat. An aircraft in the air is worth a lot more than it is on the ground. When it sits there doing nothing, it's accumulating costs, and a seat has not been sold. So even if you have someone sitting with we call it a bum on a seat, that's earning you $4, that's worth something than nothing at all. So that's the situation that took place over the past year itself, and is expected to go through the next half of this year as well. This is just to show in terms of the number of cases of COVID-19 related cases and the destinations itself. Pretty much an informational slide. As of 2018 May, there was 100% of the world destinations had travel restrictions. And 185 destinations have completely or partially closed their borders as of May 2020. And that, as we checked again a week ago, it was about the same amount that still stands. And Samoa Airways Samoa is actually one of the most restrictive countries with these border controls in place. Right, with the inability to transport international passengers or grow international traffic, etc., the airlines took to transporting cargo. where the border closures actually identified the need for countries to continue having supply into their countries in terms of essential needs, in terms of cargo, medical, perishable goods, etc., that need to be transported. And the Pacific is one of the biggest regions that require that as an ongoing basis, considering that some of the ships that do come in need to be quarantined for 14 days, whereas cargo coming by air is already sprayed, everything else, and comes in a lot quicker and is delivered a lot faster as well. So that's what it ramped up the cargo over the past year as well in terms of the airlines' support around that. And also there's been a lot of support around a lot of ADB, World Bank, and other agencies around it, even private partnerships that have supported the supply of cargo and of course subsidizing costs for other airlines in order to supply cargo to some of the regions around the Pacific. I'm not sure if you can see this, but let me just try to see if you can. This is just to show what it means in terms of the past year in some of the regions. As of November, I think this is, how some of the airlines in the regions. This is the top airlines in the Australasia region. Obviously, we don't sit in the top 10 at the moment. We'll get there soon enough in a number of years. But Fiji Airways, as you can see, PNG, Air Tahiti. Fiji Airways got 71% of their flights. If you're not aware of Fiji Airways, they had to go into $455 million guarantee with the government. They had to loan off the Nupifa, etc. So there's a lot of debt that's sitting around some of these airlines, including Air Tahiti, PNG Air, etc. So these are huge debts that sit some of the airlines, and they've got a number of aircrafts that sit on leases, wet leases, or dry leases for that matter. For example, if I would take Fiji Airways, because I'm a former Fiji Airways staff, the airline acquired, before the COVID-19, it grew rapidly, and it's a very successful airline, I must say. In terms of the aircraft fleet it had about 5 Maxes, right? 2 had been supplied, and by that time the Maxes were grounded. They had to ground their Maxes, but they had to continue paying lease for 2, and that's a couple of million a month. And then they acquired an A350 and an A330 aircraft. That's another lease, couple of million a month as well. Now with COVID-19 hit, all those leases, so they've got about 6 wide-body aircraft and 4 narrow-body and about 5 props, and they were grounded, and that's millions in lease as well. And lease contracts, of course, is very tight to get out of. Thus, the airlines seeking government support, which gave about a $455 million guarantee from the government in terms of allowing the airline to continue. I think is up till June this year, and then see how they move forward from there. PNG Air obviously is going into bankruptcy soon enough. The latest we've heard. Air Tahiti is trying to seek more funding from the government. Tiger Airways is almost going to go bust as well. So this is within our own region, and the sufferings that these guys are having as well. Now, in terms of the impact it has on the tourism sector, the COVID-19, because obviously the airline industry contributes towards the tourism sector, and a vast amount in terms of what it does. As you notice, if you look at the GDP, the impact of the tourism on GDP for some of these countries in the South Pacific. If you look at French Polynesia and Cook Islands, you look at how vulnerable they are in terms of the support for tourism. This is 80% plus, about 87% for Cooks on the GDP for tourism. Now, no tourists. And you would, if you be reading the news, how much they wanted to get that bubble done with New Zealand, and then push so hard for it, and that's precisely why. And you can understand where they're coming from. And from New Zealand's perspective, they understand that as to why giving priority to Cook Islands over some other Pacific islands is because of the reliance on tourism for the GDP. And if you look at the hours in Samoa, it's around about 30% or so, and employment is between 10 to 15% in terms of the tourism industry. Fiji, of course, but you can see the amount of revenue that ties around Fiji, even though the GDP is below 50%. The amount of revenue that actually is tied around it as well. French Polynesia is another vulnerable one as well. And no good news coming out of this since French Polynesia is starting to have COVID-19 cases as well. They tried to open up sometime in June, July last year without any quarantine, but that kind of backfired when they had many cases coming through as well, and it's still growing. This is to show, this is working with SPTO in terms of the tourism status of Samoa prior to COVID-19. This is 2019 results. And as you would see, the international visitor arrival, this is just international visitor arrivals, other passports, not Samoan passports. So it's 181,000 people who spent about $413 million here in Samoa. Well, that's a big amount of money, right? And they employed about 5,000 employees in the industry as well. Now, 430 million NZD is a lot for a small island nation. And a significant amount of this traffic came, of course, from New Zealand. Good amount came from Australia, and of course, American Samoa, USA, Fiji. As such, everyone knows Fiji is at 2%, because a lot of this traffic that comes from Fiji either comes from Australia or the US. If you see there's Fiji traffic. Point-to-point Fiji, there's not much traffic between point-to-point Fiji and Samoa. Fiji is a transit point, where traffic from the US and Australia come through Fiji and then on to Samoa. That's the reason why Fiji Airways does bring traffic across to Samoa, because they work well in terms of a transit point that provides feed off the international traffic that transits through Fiji. And of course American Samoa, which is obviously a good amount of passengers as well that come to and from. So is that an interesting slide? Has anyone seen this before? No? These are the status. This is just an indication of what happened so far in terms of the Samoa status, in terms of its border control put into place. It's obviously one of the most restrictive islands or destinations, you would say. And flights are only repatriation flights that are approved by New York as well. Unless the emergency committee approves it, it comes through. Otherwise, no. And we've got to commend our government for doing that. It has kept the country safe so far in terms of what they've put into place. In terms of Samoa Airways, I could have put in colorful graphs, but I thought I'd just write it down, because that's what it is. There was immediate withdrawal of all international and regional services for us. We placed 90% of our plus 200 staff on leave without pay. Immediately. We couldn't pay them because there was no flights. Once borders shut, we had nothing for the staff to do, so we had to let them go and gave them the opportunity to look for jobs elsewhere. They are on leave without pay. They can be working full-time elsewhere, but when we do resume services full-time, they will be the first choice to be employed back into the airline. And that is largely based not on them just being previous staff, but also based on them having the relevant experience in the industry. There are immediate cost controls around high-risk divisions like engineering, etc., where parts, spares, that can become highly expensive. For an airline, when you have an aircraft and you buy a part, say a screwdriver, a screw, and you put it on the shelf, that screw has a lifetime. It's valid for 1 year. And if that screw can be worth $15,000 for an aircraft. So if it's not used, it becomes a liability. So that all had to go in, the engineers have to go and review all the spares and everything else, but it doesn't have a high turnover. Okay, let's ship it out, let's sell it. Let's sell those stuff. We can get them later down the line because we don't need them right now. So and you can sell parts here and there in terms of the spares that you have. We canceled and restructured some of our supplier contracts. We re-looked at how we can get this done internally, more better, in terms of combining some of the work scope. Management, we were requested to work at plus 100%. And that was, a lot of us did that in the sense that we wanted to see the airline get through this. And we were asked to work at 50% salary levels, which we've done so over the past 12 months. And largely in support of the fact that we needed to get the airline an aircraft, which required the expertise of the management itself to be in place. So yep, we packed it up and took it on the chin and said, move forward. And all in support of our CEO as well, who's backed us all the way. We've lost 155,000 passengers essentially in the past 12 months, if we put it down in numbers, with no flight. Our revenue loss, passenger revenue alone was about over 70 million, right? But remember, there's no cost as well. So we try to save money. If we lost revenue, we didn't have any cost. However, there's an important note that the airline has a small operational cost base versus major carriers. We have no expensive aircraft leases. We don't have the 737s and the A330s, big aircrafts that are sitting on the ground. We don't have that. We are lucky not to have that. So then as an ongoing lease cost, we don't have that at all. We continue to operate within American Samoa. We have an agreement with American Samoa to operate domestically, and we continue to do charters between American Samoa and Samoa as well, in terms of much-needed charters from either island. We removed the highly expensive wet lease from Malindo. Now, if you guys remember, the Malindo wet lease was brought in because Samoa Airways had a MAX aircraft that was essentially going to be the MAX 900, the MAX 9. And that was going to be, Samoa was going to be the first to use the MAX 9 in the world. But with the grounding of the MAX aircraft because of the accidents, the grounding obviously had all airlines scrambling for aircraft. So all the airlines that had had to ground their MAXs scrambled for aircraft, where the 737-800 NG became highly expensive because of demand. So Samoa was being caught out in the middle of all of this, and being a smaller airline. The big airlines got priority, because they took 4 aircrafts, 5 aircrafts. Samoa was needed 1. So we hit Malindo, and Malindo said, okay, we'll give you an aircraft, but this is the price. And you don't have a matter of choice, because he wanted to continue servicing the market. And the reason why he continued servicing the market is to ensure there's capacity in place, there's continued capacity for the tourism industry, there's also continued growth for the markets, and obviously there's competition as well. So, but that impacted the airline drastically in terms of cost. Now, turn that around and flip that around now, the situation is different, where airlines are now grounding all the aircrafts, where aircrafts are sitting on the ground. The airlines that had many aircrafts have got no use for them now. Leasing companies that leased aircrafts here and there, now having to take all these aircrafts back. Are trying to find people to take them again. So we got rid of Malindo, but we were caught with a wet lease because of the situation. But now the pandemic has caused a reverse situation where it's become a buyer's market, not a seller's market. So the MAX 9 created a seller's market on the 73s. The pandemic has created a buyer's market for us, which in turn meant the lessor could be sitting across the table and he could throw an aircraft at us and say, this is the price. We'd write down on a piece of paper and say, this is what we can afford. And they'd say, but that's too little. I said, well, take it or leave it. And they don't really have a choice, because it's either that or the aircraft just sits there. So that resulted in the airline actually negotiating one of its best lease ever in its history. So we've got an aircraft that's young. She's a 5-year-old girl. She's pretty as hell. I mean, she's pretty. She's got a whole new paint job on her. She's got some motifs on her. We added more motifs on her. She's got a great interior, and she comes very, very cheap in terms of cost. And we've negotiated that over the past 10 months, back and forth. I don't think we'll ever get another cheap lease like this in history. But it's been great, and we do expect that aircraft here in Samoa by at least the 3rd week of March. And that's where we're sitting at this moment. The team have worked tirelessly to get this all done over the past year. They're now negotiating how we get our AOC, which is our Air Operator Certificate. So previously we operated under other airlines' Air Operator Certificate, but Samoa Airways is now working on getting its own Air Operator Certificate, which means it's its own license to fly commercially and approved, which means its engineers are approved to work on the aircraft, etc. So that's going to go through a whole new inspection, which is great, with the New Zealand NZCAA, and that's all going to be in motion in the next couple of weeks. So it's been busy, but it's been a happy place so far, considering what we've been through over the past 12 months. The value of Samoa Airways, I keep repeating myself, and part of the reason why I came to Samoa Airways, I gave up a cushy job in Fiji. The fact is, I've worked with Samoa for 15 years, for the tourism industry, from the SPTO board, for the tourism board and the Tourism Association here in Samoa, trying to promote Samoa and of course the Pacific itself. I fell in love with the destination, and I always knew there was potential for it. I love the history of the Polynesian Airlines. It has a great, colorful history. Of course, there were bad times, but there's an opportunity to tell another story or new story out of all of this. And the value of a flag carrier is highly important to a small destination like Samoa. Globally, it's the brand. Samoa is a brand. And the flagship Samoa Airways carries that brand globally, not only through just its carrier, its aircraft, but through its selling opportunity, the people it negotiates with. You know, we talk to people as far as Europe to sell Samoa, for that matter. We've got, before COVID-19, we had people ringing up our phones and emailing us, can we sell you, can we sell you? Because Samoa was growing rapidly in the market. The Australian market alone grew by 32%. I mean, if I show you, it traded at about 32% year on year since Samoa Airways' inception in 2018 and 2019. When Virgin was operating, it grew the market by 7 or 8% over 7 years. There was nothing done in order to promote the destination Samoa. But what Samoa Airways did is name itself, selling Samoa. And then there was Samoa selling Samoa. You know, you're going out there selling the idea of a great holiday, a different holiday from Fiji, from Vanuatu. The top destinations in the Pacific is Fiji and Vanuatu and Tahiti. But Tahiti obviously is French Polynesian, and versus what Australia and New Zealand love in the US market, it's Vanuatu or Fiji. And Samoa, believe me, when I went to Australia and talked to travel agents, people didn't know about Samoa. Where is Samoa? You know, and that's a strange thing, because, well, I mean, the same thing happened when we were doing Fiji, when I was in Air Pacific back in the day before it became Fiji Airways. We go to the States and you ask a travel agent, do you know about Air Pacific? And they'd say, is that a refrigeration company? It's Air Pacific. And there was a company named Air Pacific, it's a refrigeration company, you know, air conditioning and all that. But no one knew about it because the brand changed from Air Pacific to Fiji Airways. And that's so. And now with Samoa Airways coming in and the inception of Samoa Airways, it sold that brand a lot better. It ignited that dream about where is Samoa. Because the brand has to ignite the dream. You know, you got to ignite the dream for a consumer to go and look for something to purchase, to say, okay, I want to go for a holiday. You got to ignite that dream. And how do you ignite the dream? Is not by, you got to sell. What is the brand? Samoa. Sell Samoa. It's about the destination. It's about the people. It's about the culture. Whatever it is about, but you've got to portray that as part of the brand. And Samoa Airways did that by its name itself. Obviously, the carrier alone, it's 35% of the market the whole market that comes into Samoa. Samoa Airways brings 35% of it. That alone totals to about 150 million in revenue on the ground, not us, spending on the ground. So all those people that come in, that 35%, the business market that come in, they actually spend that much money on the ground. So the contribution, the indirect contribution that Samoa Airways has to the economy as well is important. So you take that away, you take away a lot of things. You take away the national carrier, you take away a lot of things that's attained to it. So that's highly important in terms of the contribution the airline has to the economy is worth a lot more than the airline itself. The airline links the destination. It is the link. If you take away, if a foreign carrier comes in, they go in, they don't like it, they get out. They have no obligation to the country or the people. They don't really care. But the national carrier, it does. It is born with it. It is its obligation. It's the country and the people. Obviously, I talked about the growth with Australia. I'm sure many of you remember, of course, the prices of tickets as well. With Air New Zealand, with Virgin, versus prior Samoa Airways and after Samoa Airways. They were highly expensive. They were $3,000 tickets sometimes to travel economy class, versus what it is now when Samoa Airways came in, tickets dropped to about $500. So competition is important. And that's what the airline did. They came in, they dropped prices down, which is essentially what the Prime Minister wanted to do. He said, look, people suffer if they can't visit families because it's highly expensive. I mean, that's wrong. For the number of Samoans that live offshore, wanting to come home, or ones at home wanting to go offshore, can't afford it, couldn't. So what the airline did made that affordable for everyone. And that's what increased the Australian market drastically. If you flew on, I use Fiji Airways again, I'm sorry. Flew on Fiji Airways. I used to handle the Samoa market as well, in the Pacific region. Because it's a two-sector fly, you could say the Samoa sector can cost you $200. They might have a seat that says $200, and from Australia it might say $800. But unfortunately, it won't be 800 plus 200. It'll be 800 plus 800, because they take the highest fare and multiply it by 2. So the customer doesn't have a choice. And back the day, and then you have Virgin, who would either, it's unfortunate, but they would work out a way where you can't fill the direct services, but also support services via New Zealand, which is highly more expensive, and they got a better return from Air New Zealand. So we'll collect Air New Zealand through Australia. So Australia, Sydney to Auckland, Auckland to Samoa, and that's the sort of things that would come up. But those expensive fares did drive the need to say, okay, we need to put competition in play. And that competition drove a larger market share, a larger market growth, and of course an improved market share for the airline as well, which was great because we had a lot more people visiting family and friends. We had a lot more reunions. We had a lot more functions on the ground. I mean, the events that I think Samoa Tourism couldn't keep up with the amount of events that were happening on the ground as well. We had a number of requests for groups. Prior to COVID-19, we had a number of concerts that wanted to be here. Right after UB40 was wanting to come to Samoa to host a concert as well. So that's how popular Samoa got to that stage prior to COVID-19. And this was through all the measles epidemic too. That the destination, although suffering through the measles epidemic, actually did still get recognition that, hey, we still want to come there, man. And so there was a number of events that actually happened, that were going to happen, and we hope for it to come back as we get back to normal as soon as we can. The company is 98% local, which is something you all should be very proud of. There's only 4 expats. I'm one of them. All those expats are actually Pacific Islanders, all from the Pacific. So they come highly qualified with plus 20 years of experience each. There's a manager engineering. He comes with experience from Fiji, experience from Dubai, from Qatar, etc. And he's come to re-engineer the whole engineering division and turn it hopefully by the end of the year or the first quarter of next year into a 145, which means that we can start hosting at least an apprenticeship program in Samoa, which we hope to approach in US, or in terms of how can we run a technical college in terms of supporting aviation. Because we realized when we came into the airline the lack of skill and knowledge around the industry itself. There's a big gap between what is there and where we are at the moment. So we have highly experienced engineers, but that gap between the highly experienced engineers and the upcoming ones, there's about a 20-year gap. And how the fact is we need to close that gap somewhere or the other. And we need to create an opportunity for locals, for kids and the boys and girls here to see and love the industry itself. You know, the airline industry provides a range of things to do. I mean, from finance, it's finance, accounting. You got the accounting, you got the marketing, you got the commercials, etc. But then you got pilots, you've got engineers. You know, engineering comes with avionics, mechanics, airframes, all those sort of stuff. And having more locals join the program means we can increase the skill level of the country itself in terms of what the airline can provide. And then what we're looking at in the future is that the 145 program that the industry can provide, the airline can provide, means you can sell that service to other regions around the country, around the region, who bring the aircrafts here to actually get it serviced. So those are the sort of things that we're looking at going forward as well, in terms, and obviously the support of NUS is what we're looking at going forward. So we may approach it soon enough, who knows. Those, I mean, the aviation school in Samoa is what I mentioned just now. And of course, that supports other Polynesian islands as well. Through chaos comes opportunity as well. So we always look at the flip side. Yes, we can cry over spilled milk and keep crying and crying, but we've got to look at it and say, hey, what we can do about the situation at hand. We don't have an aircraft, but yeah, we're going to get an aircraft. Okay, so what can we do different is what we want to do. So it's the time to reset. So we sat down, pressed the reset button, and said, let's do things a lot better. You know, what we do, how we do it, and when we do it. So plan better. You know, what do we need to do things better? How do we do it? And the other part is, when do we do it? Sometimes when I walked in July 19, there's a lot of Band-Aid situations. We need to fix this. Okay, let's put the Band-Aid there. We need to fix this Band-Aid there. So this presented a situation, pull back a little and say, okay, let's shift that out. Let's push that out. Let's concentrate on this. Let's put a proper plan in place. So what we developed is a 5-year plan. That 5-year plan is now complete. It's now sitting with our government in terms of its approval. So the plan, you know, incorporates a lot of things in terms of the airline moving forward. It incorporates market growth, network growth, revenue growth. It involves, of course, the creation of SBUs, we call it, strategic business units. Everyone thinks an airline is just an airline, but in an airline, you can create strategic business units that has its own budget, has its own revenue base takes as well. So right now we have 3 business units in place. We've got an airline, we've got a ground handling company, and we've got a cargo handling company. Now, they're all going to be divided and say, okay, you've got one each budget, and this is your revenue to chase, you've got to achieve it, and you have an accountable manager in place that has to achieve that. Then we've got also launching another business unit in Q2, which I can mention, of course, is the Samoa Airways Holidays. So it's a holidays business unit whereby it's exclusively Samoa, for Samoa. It's an online business, it's an online packaging company which packages holidays, a lot in line with Samoa Airways. So, and that will be done, launched in Q2. The airline negotiated a contract that cost us no money to set this up. We use the destination as the leverage. If you want us, the destination of the airline. If you want to sell Samoa Airways and partner with us, there's a destination. We and the airline will give you no better deal, so take us or leave it. So they took us. So, and that's worked out well for us. So it means that they can package a fale with a fare and put it out to the market to thousands of agencies out there to sell it. And what it does is it also incorporates some of our staff into the mix, which then who will then in turn learn more about marketing, packaging, etc. And we involve Samoa Tourism. We'll then learn more about marketing and of course packaging as well on an online perspective, where the world is online. You know, no one sells pamphlets anymore, like I used to do back in the day and hand out pamphlets. No one's handing pamphlets now, they're all online, they're on their phones, so everything's sold online. So you get the best guys available to say, you know, do this for me. And that's what we've done. So it's called Samoa Airways Holidays. And the next one we launched in Q4 is as I mentioned, was a Part 145, which is our engineering division. We reviewed our accessibility as an airline through various selling channels, both indirect and direct. So a direct channel is, of course, buying directly from the airline through its website, through its sales office, through its call center, and the indirect is through its agency. Obviously, you want to sell more through your direct channels because it costs you less. Indirect channels means you pay commission, all sorts of money out the door. But a direct channel means it costs you less. It's, from a cost of sale perspective, it's much less. And that's how we can improve that perspective. So increasing your direct sales means improving your systems, etc., which we've started working on last year. We've upgraded reservation system. We are now on phase 2 of upgrading our website, our online systems as well. Reviewing our ability to improve ancillary revenue. Ancillary revenue is huge for airlines. Samoa Airways, unfortunately, is not concentrated on this that much, largely because the airline was pushed to operate a little faster than expected. So the ancillary revenue aspect is not giving us time to concentrate on what we can do to improve that. That's 10 to 15% on top of the passenger revenue. That's the extra things that you buy from an airline. Extra baggage, extra leg room, extra, I want this seat, and I want to sit next to the aisle, I want to sit next to the window. You sell all that. Everything's sold on an aircraft. We won't be like right here where they sell the use of the toilet though, but yeah. We're looking at selling all things Samoa. We're looking at the opportunity to create an online duty free that's called All Things Samoa. We've worked a lot with some of the organizations here over the past couple of months to work out what's been created in Samoa. We worked with women, we've been talking to women in business, Mailani, and a few other communities around in terms of the products that's thrust as well, in terms of that's been made here locally, and how we can elevate that. I'm sure everyone knows Pure Fiji, right? Everyone knows Pure Fiji, see? Pure Fiji, of course, was elevated by the airline itself. Pure Fiji was unknown. It was a small house that they was making creams. The airline took that and sold it on board their flight. Fancy packaging, boom, 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 and covering down. The name just took off from there, and now they're huge. And we want to do the same for Samoan products as well. We're a Samoan airline. We want to sell all things Samoan, on board the flight itself, and also create a website where people can purchase for families. So if a family's flying from here, I can't afford to buy my uncle or my cousin there, he wants a perfume from Samoa. I said, I can't buy that. They said, okay, I'll purchase it online. You pick it up from the airport on your way out. That's sort of the ability to do that as well. So that's what we're going to do. I mean, there's a lot of things that we've looked at. I mean, Frost has whiskey and local alcohol, etc. It's nice. It's nice whiskey as well. And the ability to sell that. And we've even worked with them to have miniature bottles. So working with other industries have created a bit of creativity as well as to how they can reduce stuff. The cans, as you see, Taula has gone to cans as well. Cans works well for airlines, not bottles, and from a weight perspective as well. We looked at local talent more. I came to NUS, I think last year, 2019, to do an induction with some of the students here, and noticed a lot of them were quite interested in the airline. A lot of them took up other courses as well, but sourcing local talent in marketing, e-commerce, e-marketing, creativity in terms of guys that can sit or girls can sit on the computer and create an ad as such, using their own imagination, as finance, as IT, is what we want to grab. The airlines spent a huge amount of money sourcing these things out. We shouldn't be, but we can source this within the country itself. Review services and branding. Having the name Samoa is not a label, I just said it's a brand, and it has to ignite the dream. And of course, we bring the culture and traditions of our values into the airline's brand and service. We show it, we speak it, and we should be respecting it. And that's what we want to do. We want to be an airline that showcases that. I've worked in the airline industry for over 26 years. I've seen how people react to other people, and a big part of South Pacific is always our own folks, where you should be highly respected. And I've been in some airlines where it's not. And that's something we take seriously in our airline in terms of respect for others. And obviously, it's something we want to showcase as part of our service going forward as well. And that's highly important for us. That's it for me. Thank you. I'm sorry I spoke too much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan, for your awesome